abide with me, as falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me.
Thank you, Anne. Lovely. Don't you all agree?
Yes.
Now, the last time I heard "Abide with Me," it must have been at a funeral service, and that's not surprising. In America, at least, it's probably played at funerals and memorial services more than any other occasion. But at that funeral, even though I had heard "Abide with Me" for probably what felt like the millionth time, I found myself really listening to the lyrics. And that's a problem with some things. They can become so familiar to us, we can tune them out and our minds just move on. But I realized in listening deeply to the lyrics that day that while "Abide with Me" is certainly a solid choice for an occasion like a funeral marking the end of life, it feels like an even better choice for thinking about our lives as a whole, our attitude, our posture, our perspective, for understanding our relationships with each other and our relationship with God. The lyrics for "Abide with Me" came from a poem that was written in 1847 by an Anglican minister whose name was Henry Francis Lyell. Henry served churches that were located near a small fishing and port town on the southwest coast of England, where life in the mid-1800s, well, it could be kind of harsh. A lot of his parishioners were sailors and their families, and in those days, sailing was a very dangerous profession. It wasn't unusual for sailors to not return from sea at all, and for their families just to be left destitute. And Henry himself, he suffered from serious respiratory issues throughout his life, asthma, bronchitis. Back in those days, the treatment options for breathing problems were still pretty medieval. So whether it was his own health troubles or working among people who didn't have things easy, I think it's safe to say Henry knew firsthand that life can be a hard road to travel. You never really know when someone writes a poem or the words to a song or a hymn, what is motivating that creative impulse? Was Henry writing about death and the assurance of God's presence in the midst of all that? Did he write "Abide with Me" thinking, someday this is going to be used at a lot of funerals? Is it only meant to be a reminder that bad things happen? Or is it intended to be hopeful? If you'll forgive me for a moment, here's my modern take on those lyrics. Stay with me. It's getting darker. When I'm feeling alone, I know you will stay with me. Joy and beauty may come and go, but I know you never change. And I know you'll stay with me. With you, my fears and my burdens are lightened. Even the prospect of someday dying is transformed by knowing you will be with me through that. Your presence outshines any darkness. In an uncertain world, there's one thing I know for certain. You stay with me. I know that's not nearly as poetic as the way Henry did it, but for me, "Abide with Me," it's all about perspective, a healthy, honest perspective that life indeed can be rough. "Abide with Me" affirms that stuff just happens. But the point is, there is a way through that, and that way is pretty basic. Knowing that we have each other and that we have God to rely on no matter what happens. So I actually think of Abide With Me as a kind of love song, celebrating that perspective of presence. Now, there's a long conversation that's recorded for us in John's Gospel where Jesus talks about awakening to that perspective. Now, if you were here last week, you might remember the scripture passage we read was also from John's Gospel. It was an earlier part of this very same conversation that we heard this morning. And like today, Jesus used the word abide and offered the lovely image of a vine and its branches. So, in that way of thinking, to abide has a lot to do with knowing that we're strongly connected to each other and to God. Today, this discussion about abiding continues, but now Jesus is getting down to brass tacks. We may be connected like strong branches to a vine, but what does that really look like? Jesus speaks of being joyful, of having complete joy, in fact, but oddly, what he says next sounds a bit frightening. He says that the nature of true love, the way that we abide in love, the way of complete joy, is really about self-sacrifice, giving yourself away in love. Jesus knows that human life can be harsh, it can be unfair and cruel and unpredictable. Suffer loss and can feel completely alone, but there is a miracle in the midst of that. The miracle is that self-giving love is stronger and more enduring than anything. And we know and we experience that love through the power of presence, through abiding. Over the years, I've learned that there are a few ways of thinking about this business of abiding. Seems to me Jesus is describing movement, a natural flow that our lives include both giving and receiving. Not in the sense of reciprocity at all. No, not I've done this for you, so now you owe me. Far too often, I think that's been the model we've assigned to religion. That being a person of faith is somehow like making a bargain, because God requires our allegiance and adherence to a set of beliefs as a prerequisite, perhaps, in return for being accepted and being loved. I don't think that's called love, though. I think that's called extortion. And that is never, ever what Jesus says about our relationship with God or with one another. It's not about reciprocity. It's not a deal that you make. And giving yourself away in love is never about doing so to win a trophy or to earn a ticket to heaven. It's about understanding that complete joy arrives when we awaken to the truth that self-giving love is the ultimate discovery of freedom. The freedom from ever needing to do anything with the aim of receiving something in return, whether it's recognition or reward or payback. Otherwise, we're just back in the old unending circle of reciprocity. And that's like being a washing machine stuck on the spin cycle. I once served a church that was out in the Texas countryside when I was just starting out in ministry. And every year we held baptisms on Easter Sunday. All the youth who had gone through a confirmation type class and who had never been baptized before, and any adult who had never been baptized was welcome to be baptized that day. And in that church, we practiced baptism the good old-fashioned way by immersion. Behind the altar was this large tub that we would fill up with water. Hopefully the water heater was working that day. But I would stand in that pool wearing fishing waders, and the people being baptized would be lined up off stage, so to speak, and one by one they would make their way down into the water, and I would baptize them by leaning them back under the water, pausing a few moments, and then bringing them back up. It was a real dunking. They were completely soaked. And yes, I will admit there were a few times when I accidentally lost hold of someone and had to fish them out. Very dramatic. I think the congregation may have secretly wished that that was going to be a possibility. Otherwise, why were they munching on popcorn? There was a woman I met at church, Shirley, and she was a delight. And every year she wanted to be baptized. So the first year that she told me that, I said, "Now, Shirley, you've been a member of this church for 30 years. Haven't you been baptized yet?" And she said, "Oh, yes." I said, "Well, once is usually sufficient." She said, "But I always get baptized every year at Easter because during the year I've probably done some bad things. And I need to get right with the Lord. I've gone dancing and partied and, well, you know." I said, "Shirley, I don't think I want to know. But okay, Bill, I just want to make sure you understand it's not necessary to get baptized again. You're already right with the Lord." But she said, "But I need to do this. I need to make sure God forgives me and loves me and I'm washed clean of my sins." So every year, like clockwork, Shirley got baptized. It was important to her, and that's what mattered. All the members of the church expected it too. Now, it might not have changed Shirley's need to get baptized annually, but in hindsight, I wish I would have had a conversation with her, a conversation about what it means to abide, to assure her that our relationship with God is not about bargaining. It's not about making sure that you perform a ritual every year to ensure that God still loves you and accepts you. Because ultimately, that can become a cycle of fear. Self-giving love is how we break free of that cycle. And that is a joyful thing. I also think Jesus knew full well that while sometimes we're in the position of giving ourselves away in love, other times we're in the position of receiving that love. If you picture the dynamics of a beach, how a beach works, where the sea meets the shore, there's a natural rhythm there. There's an interplay going on. The waves wash up onto the sand. And over time, the power of the ocean can change the contours of the shoreline. So there's a dance going on where those two elements of water and sand meet. I think we can view the beach as a metaphor. The beach is not one thing, it's two things together in relationship. Without the water, the beach would be a desert. Without the shoreline, the water would be a giant ocean. But where they meet is a lot like you and me in our relationship with God and in our relationships with each other. We're always the beach. Sometimes we're the waves. Sometimes we're the sand. Sometimes we're the givers. We're in the movement, washing up in waves. We meet the beach wherever it is. And sometimes we receive, allowing the waters to wash over us and in subtle ways to change us. Back when I was in seminary, I got a powerful lesson in how that works. Now, part of seminary is book learning and lectures and lively late night nerdy debates about the Bible with your classmates. A lot of fun, but for some students, it also involves real world experiences. So while I was in seminary, I was also the pastor of that small church out in the country where Shirley got baptized every year. And I worked in a hospital as a chaplain. Both of those jobs were the rough equivalent of serving a residency while you're in medical school, minus all of the hard science, of course. But the point is, you learn how to be a minister by doing. In those days, I was cocky enough to think that I knew everything there was to know about everything. But the hospital experience turned out to be truly terrifying. It could take an emotional toll being around all those sick and injured and frightened people and their families. The hardest part was for me, you wanted very much to be helpful. And the way most of us, including myself, try to be helpful in any situation is to fix things. Take something broken and fix it. You got a flat tire? Here, let me change that for you. You need help carrying that heavy box? Here, let me carry that for you. But when you enter the hospital room of a teenage girl who has drowned, but whose body was revived, and who's now comatose, on a hospital bed with no hope of ever regaining consciousness, that is something I cannot fix. And whose family is there with her, and they are going through the heart-wrenching decision of what to do next and when, and wondering why this happened, and why a loving God would even allow this to happen. That is not something I can fix. That scenario and many others like it happened often enough. I went to my supervisor and I said, I honestly don't know if I can do this anymore because I can't do anything. I can't fix this. I don't even know what to say. I want to fill up that empty space, that hospital room, with words, with something hopeful, something helpful, but I've got nothing. My supervisor was a very wise and patient Episcopal priest, and he said, you know what your problem is? You're trying to fix everything. You're trying to fly into that hospital room and say some magic words like a savior, and then have the patient and their family gush with gratitude so that you can walk out of there feeling great about yourself. You're wanting reciprocity. But that's not your job, he told me. Your only job is to give and expect nothing in return, just to give your presence. So he told me, settle down and just be there. This is not an auto repair shop. It's a hospital. No one expects or needs a chaplain to save the day. And he said, if that's what you think you're here to do, then you need to go find another profession where things can be fixed. So just be there, he said. Just be present. But don't think that's easy. In fact, being present is a lot harder than fixing things and expecting a reward. Because you're truly just giving yourself away. Here at Foothills, we started a group last summer called the Congregational Care Team. I'm so very thankful for those volunteers who check in on our members through phone calls, personal visits, for those members who are ill or injured or homebound or who are going just through a difficult season in life. And by the way, anyone can be on the Congregational Care Team, not a closed group. Anyone can join in according to their time and availability. So let me know if you'd like to be part of that. The members of that team sometimes help in concrete ways. Sometimes they literally do fix things, but their true role is not to fix whatever is broken, but to provide something that's just as valuable, if not more meaningful. And that is the simple, basic gift of presence. The knowledge that you're important, you're cared for, and you are loved, you are heard, and you are valued. The members of that team are certainly not in it for any reward or any recognition. They're in it because they understand that self-giving love is what we are created and called to do. They're in it because they are like the waves along the shoreline, giving. They're in it because they know the meaning of abide with me. The other place on that shore to be in, to abide within, is the beach itself, being a receiver. The act of living means that we will all be in that position from time to time because life presents us with situations that we never counted on. They can happen suddenly, or they can creep up on us. But those moments of unfairness or sadness or anxiety or loneliness or brokenness, those times simply happen. I'm always reminded of the old saying popularized by the Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl that what happens to us matters less than how we respond to what happens to us. And I wholeheartedly agree with that, but it can also be true that our capacity and even our freedom of choice in how we respond to anything that happens to us, anything that's difficult, that can vary a lot. What I know for certain is that when the you-know-what hits the fan in our lives, as it does from time to time, it's the presence of others standing with us in those moments, holding our hand, offering an embrace, just being there. That can make all the difference in the world, and that is abiding. Now, we may not ever consciously think about it this way, but our shared human need for friendships and social connection and belonging, that stems from our deep understanding that we need to abide, to be both givers and receivers. And that in those relationships, when they're genuine and sacred, it's never about reciprocity. Reciprocity can take the joy out of any relationship. But living in the complete joy that Jesus spoke of is to find yourself in the midst of friends where you know that if someone needs help, you will leap into action for them. And if you ever need help, someone will be there for you. But there's an important aspect to all this abiding I need to mention, and that's the abiding that we are invited to awaken to, whether we are the waves or we are the sand, the givers or the receivers. It's the abiding that is constantly there if we open our minds and hearts to it. Jesus told his friends, about extension, you and me, that whether we realize it or not, we do abide in God's love. And just like the abiding love that we share and receive among ourselves, God's love comes to us with no strings attached. It is not based on reciprocity. It is simply there with us. It's here and now. It is presence in the present. That self-giving love cannot go away because God loves no other way. The only thing we're asked to do is to be aware of it, to be aware of that abiding love, to awaken to it, to be present with it, to be the instruments of it, to be part of its movement along the shoreline, and to allow it to wash over us and to change us. So, abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help out the helpless, oh, abide with me.